Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion App course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on imtimcorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short. Now we're almost ready to start talking to the database. Now that we have our models set up, we can actually put something into the database and get something out because we have the structure for it. Think of this like the design for a SQL database. But we're not quite done yet. We have to know where to talk to the database. So in this lesson, what we're going to do is let's close all tabs and let's go to our appsettings.json file. This is where we're going to modify to put some settings in here to identify where our database lives and how to connect to it. So the first thing I'll do is after allowed hosts, we're going to put comma, and then we're going to put in quotes, database name. This will be the name of our database for our suggestion app. So let's call it suggestion app. Now we could call it suggestion_app, or we could call it something totally different. But that's the beauty of using an appsettings.json file. This can be different for every deployment we do. This is just the starting point. For right now, we'll use this in development. But when we get to deploy, we may change this to something else. We may call this, let's start with something a little better. Let's call this dev suggestion app for development. That way, we know this is the development version in case we deploy to the same servers we deploy to our production suggestion app database as well. So we know we can get rid of a developer database and start over, but for the production, we definitely don't want to touch that. So this allows us to make these changes during deploy time. That we can say, hey, it's no longer dev suggestion app, now it's staging suggestion app, or it's production suggestion app, or just suggestion app, we want to call it that. So this database name can be changed without changing our C# code. So that's why we're going to have it here. And we also need to have a connection string. So connection strings is a standardized entry in our appsettings.json. And we're going to put one in here called MongoDB. And this will allow us to have a connection string for MongoDB. But here's the problem. And that is that I don't want to show you on camera what this will be for my actual production database, because I'm not going to use the local database. The local database would work fine for most apps, but for this production level app, I am going to need a little bit of the ability to do transactions. And so with transactions, you need to have a cluster. I don't want to get into running a cluster locally, so I'm going to use Atlas, which is, I'm going to use a free version of Atlas, which is their cloud offering, so that I can have that cluster very, very easily, and I can create a database in it and work with transactions and see how they work like a real production app, and then I'll deploy it to Atlas as well and run this in production on Atlas. So Atlas is a great platform for hosting MongoDB. It keeps things up to date. It keeps things protected and secured. So definitely something I want to use. But I don't want to show you even my developer connection string. My connection string is going to be something I get from Atlas, and say, okay, hey, just copy this and paste it in this spot. So I'm just going to say put connection string here. And you might say, well, Tim, that's not going to work because that's not actually a connection string. And no, it's not. But I want to make sure that you know that when you go run this and it says, I can't connect to the database, that you go, oh yeah, connection string. If I just put a dummy connection string in here, often what people will do is they'll say, why isn't my connection working? Because I used the same exact connection string you did. And that's the problem, is a connection string is unique to the server. So your database is not my database. And I don't want to give you my database. I don't want you to have access to my server, my cloud offering for Atlas, because that would run up my usage and it would basically not, either have to pay a lot for it or it would stop working. So I want my developer Atlas to be just for me. So therefore, I'm going to put this here, and that will be your reminder to put your own connection string here, or, and this is what I would prefer you do, is right-click on your app UI project and say Manage User Secrets. Now in here, this is a JSON file, but this JSON file is not located in your project. If I hover over appsettings.json, you can see sample suggestion app UI / suggestion or appsettings.json. If I hover over this, it says C users Tim Corey, app data, roaming, user secrets, GUID, and then the secrets.json. The reason this is in a different spot is because we don't want this put into source control. I would absolutely recommend that you use Git for source control and that you commit your changes to Git. That allows you to roll things back. It allows you to version things. It allows you to try things out without fear of making a mistake. I am not using Git in this video just to keep the video as simple as possible and not explain a ton of things that aren't really focused on the main topic. With that being said, when I built this for my site for production, day one, it was in Git. Day one. And every time I had a change, that gets committed and that gets applied. And I even have a consistent continuous integration and deployment process so that I can see my changes immediately. So I'd highly recommend that. With that being said, you do not want to commit your real connection string to Git. So you put it in secrets.json. This will store it locally in a secure location on your computer that's only for you to access, but it will not be committed to source control, which means that when you deploy this, you will have to update your connection string at that time. And that's what you'd want to do anyway. This just kind of forces the issue. So this allows you to work locally and have it test just fine, but then in production, you have to put something in there of actual value or actually a real string. But again, you don't commit that to source control, you just put it in your CI/CD process. So this file is going to mirror this file. So whatever structure you have in place here, you want that same structure over here, but only for the things you want to override. So for instance, right in the root, meaning there's this curly braces, and then there's these things that are all the same level. These are all the same level. They're not inside curly braces themselves. Okay, this would be one level in because it's inside curly braces. So at the same level is connection strings. I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. And now I'm going to put my actual connection string here off screen. I'm not going to show you it, but this will allow me to run my application locally and see it work in Atlas. And then when I deploy it, I'll have to put a new connection string in. So this is what I recommend you do as well. Now, if you're not familiar with how secrets.json works and how they override app settings, or as you can see here, appsettings.development.json, oops, this file right here, this file overrides this file, and secrets.json overrides them both. If you're not familiar with how that works, then I do have a course on this where I talk in depth about app settings. They're really cool. some really cool stuff that goes on where you can layer these on top of each other. It makes your life so much easier. You can even pass in command line arguments and other things as well. But user secrets, really important to know how to use because it's going to make things work locally with your source control where you're not putting your secrets in source control. Okay, so I'll modify this and then close this file. Okay, that's done. So now my app settings are going to stay like this. I'll leave this alone because this value is going to be overwritten by the value in my secrets.json file. So when you get yours, you just modify your own user secrets in your project, okay? So that's all the changes we're going to make to our appsettings.json. We just need the database name and we need the connection string for, as I called it, MongoDB. We could call it default or anything else you want to call it, but we'll call it MongoDB just as an easy reference. So now that that's done, we can move on to actually starting to connect to our database. Now we have all this set up, let's go ahead and start working on that file we created called DBConnection. And what this file is going to be about is we're going to connect to our MongoDB database, and we're going to keep that connection open quite a bit. In fact, we're going to keep it open pretty much the entire time the application runs. This will be a bit of a performance boost to us when we try to do some heavy connection work. So we're going to try and optimize this solution for use in a heavy production environment. And so we're going to keep that connection open to save us a little bit of time when it comes to the connect and reconnect model. So that's what this class is going to do, is set up the connection for us once, and we'll create a singleton out of this in our dependency injection. And then from then on, we don't have to keep reconnecting. Now, if we decide that, hey, we need to change this because, we want it to be a little more, we want to open the connection a little more often, what we can do is change this class from a singleton to a scoped class where in dependency injection, every user gets a singleton version of it. That way, we can kind of change how this works after the fact without changing any code. So let's do this. Let's start off by talking about what we're going to do in here. First, what we're going to do is we need to have a constructor, and that constructor needs to get the configuration. So let's create a constructor, and we'll ask for iConfiguration, control dot to add that using statement at the top. We'll call it config. Control dot to create and assign a field. Now, if you haven't seen me modify my Visual Studio, then I've got a video on YouTube, a 10-minute training video on how to get this particular convention set up in the Tools Options menu. So I just noticed also that this is the old, no, it's not. Okay, we're in a class where we have namespace over here. I thought for a minute we were using the scoped namespace, but we're not. Okay, so now we have our configuration brought in. Let's create some more information in here. So let's grab our, let's create a private read-only, not a DB database connection. This is an iMongo database. So control dot to add that using MongoDB.driver. We'll create the iMongo database and we'll call this DB. This will be our database connection to MongoDB. And then I'm going to want a private, let's create a private, just a string, not a read-only string, just in case you want to change it. We probably don't. But for now, we'll say just string, and we'll call this connection ID. And by default, we're going to call it MongoDB. And what this is it references that appsetting.json connection string, this name right here. So if we'd called this default, we would need to call this default as well. This just references whatever the entry is in our connection strings. We're going to call it MongoDB, so we will hard code it here to say MongoDB. You may say, well, why are you hard coding it? Why don't you just use something else? Well, we have to at some point hard code where to find this stuff. So in this case, we're saying we have to have a connection ID of MongoDB. Now, we could change what that is, but our application has to have some requirements. So it's going to require that we have that connection string name, and then any value we put in there can be changed. That's the thing that needs to change over time, is the value, not the name. So MongoDB hardcode right here is fine. Now we need some properties here, but I don't want to create as a regular prop because of the fact that we don't want to have it be settable. We want a snippet that uses a private set. So we look down this list down here. There is the private or prop G, and prop G has a getter with a private setter. So if we type prop G and then tab twice, we get this private set by default. So you can say string, and we'll call this DB name for database name. And we'll need a few more. So prop G, and we want this to be a string, and we'll call this category collection name. So far we have the database name, and now we need to have a category collection name. We could get this from our appsettings.json, but I don't think this is something we want to change. I think that inside of our database name can change, but inside the database, the collections should probably stay the same. So I'm going to make them private sets. I'm going to put the value right here. Let's call this category or categories. That's probably fine. And then we're going to have another one, prop G string, and this will be status collection name. And we'll say that this one equals statuses. And then we'll do the same thing again, prop G string, and this is going to be the user collection name equals users, and prop G string suggestion collection name, and this would be suggestions. Okay, so those are our 4 collection names, and I'm putting these into properties so that we can reference them throughout our application and know what the collection name is. If you're not familiar, collection is somewhat related to a table in SQL. It's a similar concept, but a collection holds objects rather than just a row of data. So with this, we now have our 4 names of our 4 collections. And those 4 collections refer to our models where we have category, status, suggestion, and user. We have category, statuses, users, and suggestions based upon that same structure. Okay, so that allows us to refer to these properties instead of these hard-coded names. That way, if we come down the road and we say, you know what, I don't like the fact it's called categories, I want to call it category. Well, we can rename it in one spot and have it change for our entire application. So with that, we've got these names we can now use. Again, they're private set, which means they cannot just be changed accidentally. You can only get the value of them anywhere outside of this initialization. So now what I want to do is I want to have another prop G, and this will be the Mongo client. And let's call this client. And then I'm going to want to have some Mongo collections. So again, private sets. So prop G, let's call this iMongo collection. And this is going to have a type, so category model. And we'll call this category collection. Because we're going to open these collections once. So prop G, iMongo collection, and this is going to be the status model. And we'll call this the status collection. And a couple more. So we need to have a prop G, iMongo collection of type user model. And let's call this user collection. And prop G, iMongo collection suggestion model. Suggestion collection. Okay. So why do we have these? Well, these are the actual connections to our collections or our tables. So we're going to have a client that then collects to or connects to a database. So we have this database connection with a database name, and then we're going to connect to these collections so that later in other classes, I can just refer to, notice these are public, so I can refer to the category collection and just say, hey, category collection, I want this data. And we can get it. And it's already open and ready for us. So let's come down to our constructor now, because again, these are all private set, which means we have to either set them right after the instructions to create them, or in our constructor. So in our constructor, I'm going to say client equals new Mongo client, and I need to get the connection string. So config.get connection string for the connection ID. So that's going to get the connection ID, which is MongoDB. And then this is going to say get the connection string for MongoDB. It's going to put that in this spot right here. And it's going to then say, okay, the Mongo client, create a new Mongo client to this connection string. And that's our client. After that, we need to have a database name. So DB name equals config dot, oops, not dot, square brackets, database name. Now, we could do a .get value, but we'd have to have the binder NuGet package. So it's Microsoft extensions.configuration.binder, I believe, in order to have the config.get value extension method. But if we use a square brackets, we can get an item just based upon its name, as long as you don't mind the fact it's going to come back as a string value. The get value, you can actually cast it to a specific type. But it's going to be a string anyways, therefore this works just fine. We don't have to add that extra NuGet package. So database name is going to go to app settings, look for database name on the root here, this root set of entries, find it, and that's going to return this value. So database name for DB name, and then we can say underscore DB equals client.get databases DB name. Now, why is DB an underscore? Why is it up here as a private read-only? Well, because I don't want to pass in the database itself for everyone to use. I want it to be just usable internally. Now, I want these, the collections, to be available externally. But I am exposing a few more things publicly, like the Mongo client. The reason I'm having this be available publicly is because we need to connect to our collection outside of this DB connection. We're going to have to create transactional content, in which case we have to connect to the database directly instead of using an existing open connection or an open connection to a collection. Therefore, we're going to pass this or use this client externally. So just note that's why that's available. We'll see that in use later when we actually start working with using this DB connection inside of our classes that talk to MongoDB. So now we have a connection to the database. Let's wire up our 4 collections. So category collection equals _db dot get collection of type category model, and pass in the category collection name. And then we'll say status collection equals db dot get collection, and this is the status model and a status collection name. And then user collection equals db dot get collection, and this is the user model and then the user collection name. And finally, the suggestion collection equals _db dot get collection for the suggestion model and the suggestion collection name. Notice that IntelliCode helped me out there quite a bit because it kind of filled in things once it figured out what I was doing. So we've now created in this constructor a new client, a connection to our database. So you grab our database name, then connect it to that database. And then we've created a connection to all 4 of our collections. We've done that in the constructor. So now when we put this into dependency injection, what we'll do is we'll say, hey, I want you to make this a singleton. And then every time anybody asks for this instance, we'll use the same instance rather than reinstantiating this DB collection. Or connection. That way, we only connect to our database once, we only connect to our collections once, and we'll reuse those collection connections. So that will give us some performance benefits, like I was saying. Okay, so that's our connection information. I know it's probably getting a little confusing at times because there's a lot of stuff that you're like, how would I know to do this? Part of this has to do with the fact that I've already done this once. And so I'm trying to kind of hone down the process into the most efficient process. Some of this you would figure out as you go. But I didn't want to show you a process where we continually refactor things, because that can be confusing as well. So this is kind of like the end result. So don't be surprised if your code doesn't look like this at first. If you're trying to do a new project and you go, man, I'm not understanding how I would know to have these 4 collections, or I'm not understanding how I would know to set this all up this way as opposed to a different way. Well, that comes from refactoring. Refactoring is a process that you need to go through. We're not going to go through as much with this course just because of the fact I don't want to take up your time and confuse you with the refactoring process. I have done that in other courses. So this course focuses more on how to build this project rather than on how to start from nothing and work your way through mistakes and errors and all the rest to get to the final product. Okay, that's the difference there. We've talked about that already, but I want to make sure we're clear on that. And if you're not getting everything, try and take your time to understand what I'm talking through, but at the same time, it's okay to follow along and then come back to it again after you see the stuff used, which we're going to start using this piece right away when we start building out our data access methods and classes. So that's coming up right away, but this right here is a set of connections to our Mongo database. And we have called that dev suggestion app. So it'll create that for us the first time we connect to it. Okay, so that's how we do all of this. I want you to get this set up and get it ready, and then we're going to start working on our data access classes next.